There is a conversation you have probably had with yourself at some point, a moment when someone said something in a meeting, or wrote something you read, or solved a problem in a way that made you stop and think, how did they see that? What are they doing that I am not doing? And the frustrating answer that most people arrive at is that some people are just smarter. That intelligence is a fixed quantity distributed unevenly, that some people got more of it and you got what you got. That answer is wrong, and it is wrong in a way that matters. What separates people who think brilliantly from people who think ordinarily is not raw intelligence. It is not IQ, it is not genetics, it is patterns. Specific, learnable, repeatable patterns of thinking that most people were never taught and have never consciously examined. Patterns that, once you see them, you cannot unsee. And once you practice them, they change the quality of every thought you have. Here are 7 of them. Pattern 1. First principles thinking. Most people think from analogy. They take what already exists and adjust it slightly. If you ask them to solve a problem, they look at how similar problems have been solved before and adapt that solution. This is efficient. It is also severely limiting because it bounds your thinking to what has already been done. You cannot outthink the existing solution if you start from the existing solution. First principles thinking does something different. It strips a problem down to its fundamental, irreducible components. It asks not what is the existing approach, but what do we know for certain is true about this problem at the most basic level? What are the underlying facts, constraints, and physical realities that cannot be argued with? And then it rebuilds from there, without reference to what has been done before. Physicist Richard Feynman described this as the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. Most people know the name. Brilliant thinkers know the thing. They understand the underlying mechanics so well that when they reach the boundary of existing knowledge, they can reason forward into the unknown rather than stopping at the edge. You can practice this. Take any belief you hold or any approach you use regularly. Ask yourself why, then ask why again, then ask why again. Keep asking until you reach something you cannot reduce further. That is a first principle. Now ask yourself whether the approach you have been using is actually justified by that principle, or whether it is just convention wearing the clothes of logic. Pattern 2. Inversion. Ordinary thinking asks, how do I achieve this goal? Brilliant thinking also asks, what would guarantee I fail to achieve it, and then works backward from that. This is inversion, and it is one of the most underused cognitive tools available to human beings. The mathematician Carl Jacobi made this approach famous with the instruction invert, always invert. He found that many problems which resisted direct solution became immediately tractable when approached from the opposite direction. Instead of asking, how do I build a successful business, ask what would make this business fail with certainty. Instead of asking, how do I become a better thinker, ask what habits of thought most reliably produce bad thinking. Instead of asking, how do I maintain my health, ask what would most efficiently destroy it. The answers to the inverted questions are often obvious, strikingly, uncomfortably obvious. And once you have a clear picture of the failure conditions, avoiding them becomes more actionable and more tractable than chasing the success conditions was. Charlie Munger, who spent 60 years thinking about thinking and built one of the most successful investment records in history alongside Warren Buffett, said that inversion was among the most useful cognitive tools he ever learned. He applied it to everything from investment decisions to personal relationships. He did not just ask what is worth doing, he asked what is reliably worth avoiding. And the clarity that produced was, in his words, remarkable. Pattern 3. Second and third order thinking. Average thinkers think about the immediate consequence of an action. Brilliant thinkers think about the consequence of the consequence, and then the consequence of that. Every action sets off a chain of effects. The first effect is usually obvious. The second effect is less obvious. The third is often invisible until it arrives. And the third is frequently where the most important information lives, where the unintended consequence lives, where the opportunity no one else saw lives, where the risk everyone missed lives. Economist and writer Thomas Sowell captured this in one of the sharpest observations in the history of economic thinking. The first lesson of economics, he wrote, is scarcity. The first lesson of politics is to disregard the first lesson of economics. What he meant was that most public decision-making considers only the immediate and visible effect of a policy, while ignoring the secondary and tertiary effects that are less visible but often more consequential. This is not a political observation. It is a cognitive one. It applies to every domain. When you make a decision, the question is not only what happens next, it is what happens after that. And after that, how does the system respond? What adjustments does the environment make? What are the people around me likely to do in response to what I do? And what does that create? Practicing second and third order thinking is uncomfortable at first because it forces you to hold more variables in mind simultaneously. But with practice, it becomes a reflex, and it produces a consistently better calibrated picture of how the world actually works versus how it appears to work. Pattern 4. The ability to hold two contradictory ideas simultaneously. F. Scott Fitzgerald famously wrote that the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. This is not a literary observation. It is a description of a specific and trainable cognitive capacity. Most people resolve cognitive dissonance immediately. When confronted with two contradictory ideas, they quickly choose one, dismiss the other, and return to a state of internal consistency. This feels good. It reduces anxiety. It is also cognitively expensive in exactly the wrong way, because it means eliminating information that might be important. Brilliant thinkers tolerate the discomfort of unresolved tension longer. They hold both ideas, examine the evidence for each, look for the conditions under which each might be true, and only resolve the tension when the evidence compels them to. Sometimes they discover that both ideas are partially true in different contexts. Sometimes they discover a third idea that accounts for both. Sometimes they conclude that the tension cannot be resolved with the available information, and they sit with that uncertainty rather than collapsing it prematurely. This capacity for what psychologists call integrative complexity, the ability to see multiple perspectives and hold them simultaneously without forcing premature resolution, is one of the most consistent predictors of sophisticated thinking across domains. It is also one of the most trainable. Simply notice the next time you feel the urge to resolve cognitive dissonance quickly and resist it for 30 minutes. Ask what would have to be true for the other position to be right. You will be surprised what you find. Pattern 5, steel manning. Most people practice what is called straw manning, which is the habit of engaging with the weakest or most easily dismissed version of an opposing view. Brilliant thinkers practice the opposite. They engage with the strongest possible version of the opposing view, the version that the most intelligent and informed proponent of that view would actually defend. This is steel manning. The reason this matters is both epistemic and practical. Epistemically, you cannot know that your view is correct if you have never seriously engaged with the best version of the competing view. If you have only ever defeated the weak version, you have not tested your position against the real challenge. Practically, the world will not send you the weak version of the opposing view. It will send you the strong version. And if you have only practiced against the weak version, you will be unprepared. Philosopher Daniel Dennett articulated a version of this as a rule for genuine intellectual engagement. Before you respond to someone's position, he suggested, you should be able to restate their argument in a way they would recognize as fair and accurate, capturing everything important and anything you have learned from it. Only then do you have the standing to critique it. Practicing this is uncomfortable because it requires you to take seriously views that you may find wrong or even repugnant, but the thinkers who do it consistently report something interesting. They often discover that the opposing view contains insights they had not considered, that it is right about something, that their own position needs to be refined. This is not weakness. This is how understanding advances. Pattern 6. Probabilistic thinking. Average thinkers think in certainties. Things either are or are not. Predictions are either right or wrong. Events either will happen or will not happen. Brilliant thinkers think in probabilities. They assign likelihood estimates to claims and predictions, update those estimates as new information arrives, and make decisions accordingly. This shift sounds abstract but has enormous practical consequences. When you think in certainties, you make all or nothing bets. You commit fully to positions before the evidence compels you to. You interpret new information in terms of whether it confirms or refutes your existing position, rather than using it to update the probability you assign to that position. Bayesian reasoning, the formal name for this approach, was developed by the Reverend Thomas Bayes in the 18th century and has since become the foundational framework for decision-making under uncertainty across statistics, artificial intelligence, and cognitive science. Its central insight is simple. Start with a prior probability for a belief. Update that probability proportionally as new evidence arrives. Repeat until the evidence is exhausted. You do not need to know the mathematics to practice this. You need only to stop thinking in yes or no and start thinking in more likely or less likely. When you make a prediction, assign it a probability. When the outcome occurs, check whether your probability was calibrated. Over time, this practice builds a relationship with uncertainty that is more accurate and more useful than certainty ever could be. Pattern 7. Metacognition. This is the pattern that makes all the others possible. Metacognition is thinking about your own thinking. It is the capacity to step outside your cognitive process and observe it as an object, to notice the assumptions you are making, the biases that are operating, the patterns that are running beneath the surface of your reasoning. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman spent his career documenting the systematic ways in which human thinking departs from rationality. His framework of System 1 and System 2 thinking describes the fast, automatic, associative thinking that runs most of our mental life on one hand, and the slow, deliberate, effortful reasoning that is capable of overriding it on the other. The key insight is that System 1 is not just fast and efficient. It is also reliably wrong in predictable ways. It confuses familiarity with truth. It overweights vivid examples and underweights base rates. It sees patterns that are not there and misses patterns that are. Metacognition is the practice of engaging System 2 to examine and correct System 1. It asks not just what do I think, but how am I thinking? What assumptions am I making that I have not examined? What would I need to believe for this conclusion to be wrong? Where is the motivated reasoning in my thinking right now? What cognitive biases are most likely to be operating in this particular situation? The thinkers who do this consistently do not have different raw material than you. They have a different relationship with their own cognitive process. They treat their mind not as a transparent window onto reality, but as an instrument that has its own distortions, its own systematic errors, its own blind spots. And because they know this, they can compensate for it in ways that people who do not know it cannot. You are already doing something like metacognition right now. Reading this, noticing which patterns feel familiar and which feel foreign, asking yourself where your own thinking is strong and where it breaks down. That noticing is the beginning. The practice is making it habitual, making it the default orientation of your mind toward itself. These 7 patterns are not mysterious. They are not the product of unusual intelligence. They are habits of mind that have been cultivated by people who decided to take their own thinking seriously and then practiced doing so consistently, over time, in the places where it was most uncomfortable. The gap between the way you think now and the way you are capable of thinking is not a gap of intelligence. It is a gap of practice. And practice, unlike intelligence, is something you control entirely. Subscribe for more.